Let me ask you, last night's big-time win, was it more Nick Saban and his staff getting out-coached or better players, better talent by Clemson?
Oh, no, definitely not better talent. Not across the board, no. The NFL draft will prove that over the next 3 or 4 years. You go guy for guy, position group for position group, and Alabama had more advantages from a talent perspective and an overall player perspective. But this was a masterful game plan that was set in place on both sides of the ball by the Clemson staff. I was very impressed with the different things that they did, scheming up blitzes, scheming up pressures, rolling in coverages, doing different things from that perspective. Brent Venables did a great job drawing up that defensive plan and I think helping an elite defensive line. He didn't just lean on an elite defensive line and say, all right, boys, get out there and go get them. He didn't just play sick 'em with that group. He helped them go out and be disruptive, and I think that really led to why that defense was able to do what they did to Alabama. And then I think Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott did an excellent job offensively of helping Trevor Lawrence. The thing that I think a lot of people haven't mentioned about what Trevor Lawrence did last night, first and foremost, the Clemson offensive line deserves to be the MVP of that game because I thought that was a total mismatch, and I thought that Raekwon Davis and Quentin Williams and Isaiah Buggs would decimate that group last night. But people get a little bit consumed with Trevor Lawrence hit the big throws. He made plays down the field. He's got a big, accurate arm. The thing that Trevor Lawrence did that we need to be talking more about, DA, he got the ball out on time. You never saw him moving around in the pocket, waiting in the pocket, sort of panicking in the pocket. It was 1-2, get the ball out. And Trevor Lawrence was masterful with that last night, and I think a lot of that was by design, and that's why Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott deserve a lot of credit for how they drew that plan up to take down Alabama.
And the times that Alabama got through that offensive line, he stood there, took a hit, and still delivered on time at a pretty precise route and precise throw. He was amazing last night. Let's go back to the talent thing because the teams that have played Alabama the best recently, Clemson, Georgia, these teams, Ohio State a couple of years ago, these teams have the NFL-style talent. Now, the defensive line of Clemson might have 3 first-rounders in it. Trevor Lawrence could be the number 1 pick of the NFL draft in a couple of years from now. Do you think that Clemson right now is at an even playing field talent-wise with Alabama or still a step below in terms of their recruiting?
Overall talent, I think they're a little bit behind, but it's really close. I think Georgia's really close. I think Ohio State's extremely close. Listen, there are spots where Clemson is close or ahead. You mentioned quarterback, Travis Etienne at tailback. Now, they don't have the depth that Alabama does at tailback, but he's as good as anybody in the country. He leads the nation with 24 rushing touchdowns now. You look at T. Higgins and Justin Ross and Hunter Renfrow and that group of wide receivers, they're not far off there as well, but they don't have the talent along the offensive line. They don't have the talent in the secondary. I don't think have the talent at linebacker. But it just goes to show you that you don't necessarily have to just be 5-star after 5-star after 5-star guy to be able to go win a football game. It comes down still to X's and O's. It comes down to scheme. It comes down to matchups. And most importantly, it comes down to execution. And I thought that Alabama coaching staff maybe pressed, maybe even panicked a little bit early in that game when things weren't going the direction that they thought it would. And that just played right into Clemson's hands.
Cole Cubelic joins us from the SEC Network discussing last night's big-time win by Clemson. Who takes the blame for the botched fake field goal by Bama?
There's so much blame to go around. I'm going to give it to the kicker, though, for not being the lead blocker that they assigned him to be there. I mean, who the hell thinks a kicker should be your lead blocker on anything? I mean, what do they expect him to do? Was he going to run up at Quentin Williams and knock him out of the A-gap on that play? I mean, I have no idea what the design was, what anybody was thinking, how they felt like that was going to be executed. And then, kind of similar, going back to that Georgia fake punt in the SEC championship game, Clemson's essentially in field goal safe. It's not even an all-out block formation. And Alabama thinks that they're going to be able to pull that off. It was a move of desperation that obviously didn't work, and I think you have to lay the blame on Nick Saban. He's the one that has to greenlight that call there. So the blame shouldn't go anywhere else.
It's a call, it's a play that gets clowned because it looks so bad, but it's also a play that we never see Alabama make. We never see something that looks so goofy and so silly and so obviously not going to work. It makes you wonder just why that would ever be greenlit at that point in time. Do you think that was a declaration of panic from Alabama and Nick Saban at that moment?
Pressing, for sure. Panic, maybe. When you have the offensive capabilities that Alabama had this entire year, I don't know if you necessarily full-out panic at that point in time. but you definitely begin to press. And like you said, we don't see plays like that from Alabama very often. Why is that? Well, they don't need them very often. They haven't needed them very often this season or the last few seasons. So I think when you consider situations that Alabama has been in, they haven't been in a situation like that where they've needed a big play. And by the way, when they did a couple of years ago, they hit the onside kick, Marlon Humphrey recovers it, and they go on to win that game against Clemson in the national championship game. So very rarely does Alabama need a moment like that, need a play like that. And they just happened to draw it up at a bad time against a defense that was prepared to take it on. And I just don't know. I don't even agree with the way the thing was drawn up. So a little bit of desperation, a little bit of panic, absolutely.
Last night, Reese Davis, following the game, said that there's a new reality in college football. Do you believe that after last night?
I don't know if it's new, though, D.A. I mean, the last 4 years, these two teams are 55-4 with 2 national championships. I'll say that again. Clemson and Alabama are both 55-4 with 2 national championships. And by the way, 2 of those 4 losses for each of those teams came to the other team. So these have been the 2 dominant teams in college football the last 4 years. These 2 teams are tier 1 in college football. And then there's a step down to everybody else. We can talk Oklahoma, Ohio State. We can talk Florida, LSU, Michigan, Texas. Oregon is maybe on the come, but they're all tier 2 or lower. Make no mistake, there are 2 teams in tier 1 of college football right now. It's Alabama and it's Clemson. That has been the reality for the last 4 years. So if there's a new reality, I think it will be that nationally the perception that Clemson can go out and play with anybody on any day needs to be something that we're accustomed to, needs to be something that we have an understanding of, because there's a lot of people like me personally, that did not think Clemson could hang with Alabama last night and thought that they could get embarrassed on that field last night. And turns out Clemson now is the team that can go out and embarrass other great teams on any given night across the landscape of college football. That's the new reality that a lot of us need to deal with.
So why didn't you think that Clemson could hang last night? Why did you think they could get embarrassed? Was it because you believe that the path through to the playoff for Alabama proved more in the SEC than the ACC could ever provide for proving Clemson's greatness?
Yeah, let's just go back and look at the last 5 Power 5 teams that these 2 teams played. I think Clemson had Boston College, Duke, Pitt, South Carolina, Notre Dame. Alabama had LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn, Georgia, Oklahoma. I think the rankings will tell you, the records will tell you that was a more difficult path that Alabama had. But it's not solely based on that. I went back and I studied the Notre Dame game, and I saw Notre Dame's defensive line give the Clemson offensive line a lot of trouble. Now, they couldn't capitalize on it, again, because Trevor Lawrence knows when to get the ball out. But I felt like the Alabama front and the Alabama secondary was a step up above what Notre Dame's was. I went back to the Pitt game and saw the Pitt defensive line give the Clemson offensive line trouble. And when I saw what Quinton Williams was a wrecking ball for that Alabama defense this year. I mean, he completely erased opponents' game plans, and I kind of anticipated that he would do the same thing last night. And let's go back and look what Kellen Mond did to this Clemson secondary, what Jake Bentley did to this Clemson secondary. We would all believe that Tua and Jerry Jeudy and Devonta Smith and Irv Smith are a step above what those teams have offensively, especially up front from a protection standpoint with their offensive line. I figured Alabama would be able to move the ball offensively against this Clemson defense. I knew the front 4 would be difficult and be tough to manage, but I didn't think that the back end would play as well as they did, and I sure as hell didn't think Tua would make the huge mistakes that he made.
Cole Cubelic joins us this morning here on the DA Show from the SEC Network discussing last night's game. I also wonder, when it comes to Clemson, if people talk about a sea change or a changing of the guard or a new reality, last night suggested that Clemson is way better than Alabama, that, yes, they could be equals in generalities, but that head-to-head, at least last night, they are way better. Do you feel like that's overblown because of the final score and that they're really just 1 and 1A, or do you feel like Clemson is ahead of Alabama as a program?
I think right now you have to say that they are because of what they did and how they did it. I mean, that could have been worse last night. I mean, let's not pretend like Clemson tacked on 2 scores in the last 4 minutes of the game to make this ugly. This thing was ugly in the first quarter.
So, in other words, you don't think that was one bad night for Alabama. You think across the board Clemson's just a better football team.
Right now, yeah. I think you have to feel that way. But make no mistake, Alabama made mistakes. Clemson was going to need Alabama to make mistakes to win that game going in. But I think now when you re-dissect it, you say, if Alabama doesn't make those mistakes, Clemson probably still wins that football game. They outperformed, they out-executed and out-coached Alabama. So I think a lot of the conversation, when you bring it up the way that you do, is going to circulate around talent. And Alabama still has more talent, but I think Clemson's a better team. And they proved last night that they're a better team. And I think they proved last night that they have a better coaching staff because the plan that they put in – here's the way that game played out in my mind, just the way that it looked. And I know this is not real, but the way the optics of that game last night were Clemson probably knew they could handle Notre Dame. So they spent the majority of the month off preparing for Notre Dame and Alabama. It appeared as though Alabama prepared for Oklahoma, and then after they beat Oklahoma, began preparing for Clemson. Therefore, Clemson seemed to be 2 steps ahead of everything that Alabama did last night, and I think that, in part, makes them a better football team, yes.
We began the morning talking about this build by Dabo Swinney, and this happened 10 years ago, and Clemson is geographically in a good spot. It is a football school. They value football. Was this a sleeping giant when Dabo took it over, or did Dabo do something nobody else could have done in getting it to this point?
There's no way. I think there are a couple of sleeping giants in college football. And I think Clemson, you have to give credit to the administration for stepping up and giving him everything that he's needed to make it what it is. But I'm not going to sit here and even pretend like there's 10 or 15 or 5 or even 3 other coaches that could have gone in there and done what he's done. I'm not going to believe that. I'm just not. Because I believe that Dabo does it very different than Urban Meyer and Nick Saban and other great, even Jimbo Fisher. He has a different aura. He has a different attitude. He has a different demeanor. He does it in a very different way. So I don't know if a Nick Saban approach or if a Pete Carroll approach would have worked in Clemson, South Carolina. I can't sit here and say that I truly believe that. So was it a bit of a sleeping giant? Yes. But the administration got on board early, and you see what they've done with facilities. You see what they've done around their uniforms and their fans and on social media and through videos and production and recruiting and helping and staff size. They've done everything like a big boy program would do, and that's assisted Dabo Swinney. But he has done it his way, and his way has worked. So I think he deserves the majority of the credit, whether it was a sleeping giant or not, for being able to have the vision, the attitude, the wherewithal to go in and make Clemson what it is today.
Cole Cubelic joins us from the SEC Network. I hate to look ahead already, but who's the 3rd best program in America next season?
I think right now you have to say Georgia, and they took some serious losses over the weekend with Mecole Hardman, Riley Ridley, Isaac Nada, and Elijah Holyfield all announcing that they're going to go play in the NFL. And obviously, DeAndre Baker, their best corner, announced that before the Sugar Bowl that he wasn't going to play and sat out. He's going to go to the NFL. So that's going to be tough to replace. But I look at the best offensive line in college football going into 2019 is going to be in Athens, Georgia. We saw Jake Fromm carve up Alabama in the SEC championship game. He's going to be back. He'll still have DeAndre Swift behind him. And I think the talent has been recruited there on defense to be able to take that step. So if I had to go number 3 right now behind Clemson and Alabama, it's going to be the Georgia Bulldogs.
If you're a college football fan, you're not following Cole Cubelic already on Twitter, you should absolutely be doing that. That's where you can find him on Twitter at Cole Cubelic. He joins us for the SEC Network. This was awesome, man. It's always been fun to catch up with you throughout the football season. Maybe let's do this as we make our way through signing day, and then we start getting into a little spring football again, all right?
I'd love to do it. We got to have something to offset this break before college football starts again. So anytime you want, I'm in.
I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks so much, Cole.